After nearly a decade of waiting, countless theories, and more emotional investment than any of us probably care to admit, Stranger Things has finally reached its conclusion. And I need to be completely honest with you right from the start of this video. This finale left me with a complicated mix of feelings, and not all of them are what I expected walking into this final season. Whether you walked away from season 5 feeling completely satisfied or utterly disappointed, I think we can all agree on one thing. This show meant something to us. It changed television, it launched careers, and it reminded an entire generation why they fell in love with storytelling in the first place. But did it stick the landing? Did the Duffer Brothers deliver on nearly 10 years of promises, mysteries, and emotional investment? That is exactly what we are going to break down today in this complete review of Stranger Things Season 5. If you are new here, welcome to Quiet Theories. This is the place where we dive deep into the stories that capture our imaginations, and there is no story that has captured more imaginations over the past decade than this one. If you enjoy thoughtful analysis, and you want to join a community that loves dissecting the shows and films we are passionate about, consider hitting that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow, and it means you will not miss our future deep dives into the entertainment you love. Now let us get into everything Stranger Things Season 5 had to offer. Season 5 picks up approximately 584 days after the devastating events of the Season 4 finale. If you recall, Max's brief death at Vecna's hands tore open the gates between our world and the Upside Down, and Hawkins has never been the same since. The idyllic Indiana town we first met back in 1983 has transformed into something unrecognisable. It is now a militarised quarantine zone, surrounded by barbed wire fences and crawling with soldiers monitoring the dimensional breaches. The residents who stayed behind are essentially cosplaying their old lives while living under constant surveillance and threat. Among those stubborn Midwestern remainers are Joyce Byers, her kids, the Wheelers, the Sinclairs, the Hendersons, Robin, Eleven, and Hopper. Our familiar heroes have been operating with a shared secret purpose, working under the radar of both the military and their fellow citizens while trying to figure out what has become of Vecna, who essentially disappeared after Max went into her coma. The WSQ radio station, nicknamed Squawk, serves as their new base of operations. Nancy, Steve, Jonathan, and Robin use the powerful transmission tower and remote location to plan covert scouting missions into the Upside Down. Meanwhile, Mike, Lucas, Will, and Dustin continue attending school while assisting as lookouts and field support during operations. The premiere episode had a lot of heavy lifting to do. After such a long gap between seasons, the Duffers needed to re-establish the world, catch us up on where everyone has been, and set the stakes for this final battle. And honestly, this first episode is probably the weakest of the season. It is saddled with so much exposition that some of the character moments feel rushed or forced. The radio station setup initially feels like a convenient excuse for Robin to deliver information dumps to the audience, and it lacks the organic charm of previous locations like Hawkins Lab or Starcourt Mall. There are also some character dynamics that feel regressed in this opening chapter. Steve and Jonathan's rivalry over Nancy feels like ground we have already covered multiple times, and reducing Eleven to an obsessed training machine while Hopper falls back into his overprotective patterns felt like a step backward for both characters. However, once the Duffers get past the necessary exposition, the season really starts to find its footing. One of the most welcome changes this season is Dustin's characterization. Gaten Matarazzo has always been a cast MVP, but his work here elevates Eddie Munson's death from season 4 into something that continues to matter. Dustin is bitter, angry, and defensive of his fallen friend who is still vilified by the community for his perceived demonic pursuits through the Hellfire Club. This is a realistic and welcome turn for the typically sunny character, and it forces the rest of the group, especially Will, to step up and fill the creative and emotional gaps. Dustin's grief gives weight to the stakes we are dealing with and reminds us that actions in this show have had real consequences, even if the main cast has been protected by plot armour. Speaking of Will, Noah Schnapp delivers what might be his best performance of the entire series. Will has spent most of the show being either missing, possessed, or relegated to the sidelines, but Season 5 finally gives him agency and purpose. His reactivated connection to Vecna becomes a crucial plot, element, and his relationship with Robin provides some of the freshest character dynamics the show has had in years. Robin's independence and confidence gives Will someone to look up to, and she becomes the person he can talk to about his feelings in ways he cannot with the rest of the group. The pairing of Will and Robin also allows the show to address Will's sexuality in a way that feels more natural than some of his earlier scenes. Robin's own journey to self-acceptance makes her the perfect mentor figure for Will as he navigates his own identity. Maya Hawke continues to be an absolute standout, bringing energy and wit to every scene she is in, while also grounding the emotional moments when they matter most. Now let us talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the Vecna in the Upside Down. One of my biggest issues with this final season is how they handled their primary antagonist. In Season 4, Vecna felt genuinely terrifying. He was this otherworldly presence who could tap into your mind at any moment, snap your limbs, and drag you into a nightmare dimension. The tension of wondering who would be cursed next created genuine horror, but in Season 5 that fear seems to have evaporated almost entirely. When the season opens, everyone talks about Vecna like he is an annoying pest they keep having to deal with rather than an existential threat to reality itself. The characters joke about kicking his butt and seem almost dismissive of his power. This extends to the newer characters as well, particularly the children who end up trapped in his mindscape. They treat him more like a schoolyard bully than a being who has literally murdered people by snapping their bodies like twigs. The problem is compounded by Vecna's track record when you really examine it. Throughout the entire series, his biggest wins were killing 3 teenagers in Season 4 and opening the gates into Hawkins. Every other plan he has attempted has failed. He failed to negotiate with all scientists, failed to escape Hawkins' lab twice, failed to keep Will kidnapped for long, and his kidnapping of children in this season does not really amount to anything significant either. For a villain who was supposedly planned from the very first season and has connections to multiple characters through his history, as Henry Creel, he feels strangely disconnected from the story in any meaningful way. What really frustrates me is the missed potential with Vecna's character. He went to school with Joyce and Hopper. He has this deep history with the town and its residents. Yet when he has one-on-one moments with characters who share that history, he never really explores those connections. He had opportunities to have meaningful dialogue about their shared past, but instead he just lets them go, which directly contributes to his own defeat. The character who was presented as this Freddy Krueger-like nightmare entity ends up feeling like a diluted version of Eleven who chose to be evil, because the Mind Flayer showed him the world was broken. That is not a particularly compelling motivation for a final boss villain after 10 years of build-up. Linda Hamilton joins the cast as Dr. K, and while she brings her signature intensity to the role, the character herself ends up feeling like a missed opportunity. She was supposed to be more than a Dr. Brenner replacement, but that is essentially what she becomes. Like Brenner before her, she conducts brutal experiments on pregnant women to create children with powers. She runs a secret lab in the Upside Down where she hoards creatures for dissection. But her motivations are never fully contextualized, and the military figures in general come across as one-dimensional antagonists. The government in this season lacks the menace that Hawkins' lab had in the earlier seasons. Remember how in Season 1 they posed as CPS to find 11 and murdered Benny on the spot even though he was cooperating? That established them as ruthless entities who would eliminate any witness to protect their secrets. But in Season 5, they seem almost disinterested in pursuing the heroes once their immediate goals are thwarted. Characters who have killed military personnel and committed numerous illegal acts are essentially left alone once 11 disappears. It does not feel consistent with what we knew about how these organizations operated. The mythology expansion this season introduces the concept of the wormhole and Dimension X, attempting to add real-world scientific elements to explain the Upside Down's existence. This is a bold choice, and I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I appreciate the ambition of trying to give the supernatural elements a more grounded explanation. On the other hand, the science does not always hold up to scrutiny. If the wormhole creates a parallel between dimensions, why does gravity work differently depending on which direction you are travelling? When the worlds begin to collide, why is Dimension X, the one shaking while the real world remains stable. These inconsistencies make it feel less like two parallel dimensions on the verge of collision and more like our reality being invaded by an evil dimension, which undermines the symmetry the mythology seems to be going for. Part of me thinks they should have left the Upside Down's existence as a complete mystery. There are still unanswered questions, like who exactly created the Upside Down and why it only spans a specific radius around Hawkins. These feel more interesting than the explanations we received, and sometimes the unknown is more compelling than any answer could be. The season does excel in certain areas, particularly in its action sequences and visual spectacle. The budget for this final season reportedly approached $500 million, and you can see every cent on screen. The tower sequence, the infiltration of Henry's mind in the Creel house, and the standoffs in the upside-down Hawkins lab are genuinely excellent pieces of filmmaking. Frank Darabont, director of The Shawshank Redemption and The Mist, helms one of the episodes and brings his expertise to commando-style action sequences and period piece elements. The climax of Volume 1 rivals anything the show has ever done in terms of scale and cinematic ambition. Sadie Sink's return as Max is another highlight. After spending so long lost in Vecna's mind, her emergence as a protector of Holly and relentless fighter against Vecna gives her character new dimensions. The scenes where she navigates Vecna's memories while trying to find an escape route are tense and visually striking. However, the execution of her escape attempts does raise some logical questions. Max's first escape from Vecna in Season 4, running toward her happy memories while running up that hill, played, was one of the most powerful moments in the entire series. It resonated with audiences worldwide and became an iconic television moment, but the subsequent escape attempts in Season 5 try to recapture that magic without the same emotional build-up. When Max finally gets another chance to escape, she does not seem to learn from her previous failed attempt. She takes her time having heartfelt conversations when she should be sprinting for the exit, and the logic of how the escape doors work is never clearly established. Holly Wheeler, played with solid commitment by her young actress, becomes a significant focus this season. But her characterization falls into some Disney movie cliches. I was hoping for a kid who would endure tremendous hardship and emerge stronger, similar to how Will's arc played out in Season 1. Instead, Holly often feels like a Marvel superhero kid who gets kidnapped by the villain and saved by the heroes. The children trapped in Vecna's mind with her are written in a way that feels cartoonish rather than realistic. Remember how Season 1 opened with the kids naturally cursing and joking as they rode their bikes home? Those kids felt genuine in a way that Holly's generation does not quite achieve. Will's arc is probably the strongest storyline of the entire season. His coming out scene is beautifully performed, and the emotional core of accepting yourself regardless of what others might think is handled with care. However, the placement and pacing of this storyline feels disjointed. Vecna apparently showed Will a vision of coming out that ended badly, which motivates Will to take control of the narrative himself. But the timing of gathering everyone together for this moment right before a critical mission feels strange. Narratively, it might have been stronger to have this revelation come earlier and then let Will's heroism flow naturally from his newfound self-acceptance. Will's most heroic moment actually comes before the finale, which is an odd choice. If you are building toward a character's self-actualization, you would expect their biggest triumph to come in the climax. I envisioned Will at the center of the final battle, using his connection to freeze creatures while the group fought their way through the Upside Down. Instead, the finale has the crew enter Dimension X, remain largely untroubled until they encounter the giant spider-like Mind Flayer, and then essentially throw things at it until 11 does the heavy lifting. This brings me to a broader criticism of the finale. If you are going to keep this many characters alive through 5 seasons, they need something meaningful to do in the final battle. Instead, most of the ensemble feels like foot soldiers adding random damage rather than utilizing unique skills they have developed over the years. Steve picks up Eddie's old spear instead of a gun, which feels like symbolic tribute but is tactically questionable given what they are facing. Dustin and Steve run underneath a giant stomping monster to conveniently find egg sacs that needed destroying. These moments feel contrived rather than earned. The show has always struggled with pulling its punches when it comes to main character deaths. Each season introduces likable new characters like Bob and Eddie, who meet tragic ends to establish stakes, but the core cast remains protected by plot armour that grows more obvious with each season. By the finale, characters survive things they absolutely should not, and the tension suffers because we stop believing anyone important is truly at risk. Karen Wheeler's transformation into an action hero is perhaps the most extreme example of this season's character inconsistencies. She was a largely unaware side character for 4 seasons, but suddenly she has become this Terminator-style badass with all the plans and ideas. Meanwhile, Ted Wheeler remains unconscious and useless, which has become something of a running joke but also represents a missed opportunity. Giving Ted even one heroic moment protecting his family would have been more surprising and satisfying than making Karen into another warrior. The extended epilogue of the finale takes inspiration from Return of the King with its multiple ending sequences. If you were not a fan of that film's extended goodbyes, you will likely feel every minute here. Robin's radio narration and the graduation sequence function to give everyone their final moments, but by the end, it does start to feel like sitting in bleachers squirming under a hot sun. The more intimate goodbyes work better, particularly the older kids embracing their futures while wishing they could hold on to their bond, Hopper's engagement at Enzo's, and the final D&D campaign for the original gang. The music choices throughout the season are exceptional and represent some of the best needle drops in television history. From Prince to Fleetwood Mac to the emotionally devastating use of David Bowie's Heroes in the finale, the soundtrack elevates every scene it touches. The Duffers better prepare for the reality that they may never get a music licensing budget like this again. These choices will be remembered as one of the show's defining characteristics. Jamie Campbell Bower deserves recognition for his performance as Henry and Vecna. The revelation about how he connected with the Mind Flayer, embracing the darkness within himself rather than being corrupted by external forces, is actually more interesting than a redemption arc would have been. Watching his younger self choose evil after murdering the mystery man in the cave establishes that Henry was always this way. The circumstances did not create the monster, they just gave him the tools to become one. This is way better than trying to redeem a character who has caused this much destruction. The finale's approach to closure is going to divide audiences. The Duffers chose not to go the bloodbath route where swaths of characters die to elicit emotional responses. Instead, they stayed true to what they clearly believe matters most about their show: the characters and the relationships forged over 5 seasons. There is an argument to be made that this was the right choice. Life has already been intensely unkind to Hawkins and its citizens. Giving our heroes some momentary peace and victory aligns with the D&D campaign metaphor that has always been the show's beating heart. You build your character up, discover each other's talents, put them into action when needed, and come out together victorious and ready for the next adventure. But there is also a strong argument that the stakes never felt real because we knew the main cast would survive. The tension of wondering who might die next, which made Season 4 so gripping, is largely absent here. When everyone survives impossible situations repeatedly, the dramatic stakes diminish regardless of how much spectacle surrounds those situations. Eleven's sacrifice and the ambiguous nature of her ending is probably the most divisive choice. If you are a realist, her choice means she lived a terrible life of loss and did not get a happy ending. If you are an optimist like Mike, you can imagine she lives on in some bittersweet existence. The show has always been a modern fairy tale rooted in Gen X memories of childhood, threatened by imagined evils. That the mythic heroines of the tale were the means by which all the Hawkins characters could grow into their best selves is a story grounded in life's truths, even if the execution leaves some questions unanswered. There are numerous characters who simply disappeared this season or were forgotten entirely. Dr. Owens, Argyle, the Russians, Hopper's deputies, Susie, Eddie's uncle, and Steve's old high school friends all vanish without resolution. Even within this season, characters like Andy and his bully crew, Erica and Mr. Clark, disappear from the finale after brief appearances. The bloated character count meant that some players would inevitably fall through the cracks, but it still feels like a betrayal of time invested in these people across multiple seasons. The dialogue is another area where this season falters compared to earlier ones. Stranger Things always excelled at capturing the feel of 1980s speech patterns and movie dialogue. But several scenes this season feel like 2025 characters dropped into the 1980s. The social politics and speech patterns do not always fit the era, and some heartfelt moments are undercut by lines that feel written for modern audiences rather than characters who would have actually existed in that time period. So where does this leave us? Season 5 of Stranger Things is a season of contradictions. It features some of the most spectacular action sequences and visual effects the show has ever produced, alongside some of its weakest character writing and logical consistency. The performances remain excellent across the board, with the cast elevating material that would feel much weaker in less capable hands. Noah Schnapp, Gatan Matarazzo, Maya Hawke, and Sadie Sink deserve particular recognition for making their storylines work emotionally even when the plotting around them falters. The Duffers clearly evolved into the blockbuster filmmakers they admired in their childhoods. Their command of scale, their ability to stage massive action sequences, and their eye for visual storytelling have only grown stronger. But somewhere along the way, the intimate character work that made Season 1 so special became harder to maintain as the scope expanded. The kids playing D&D in a basement grew into a cast of dozens fighting interdimensional wars, and not everyone could get the attention they deserved. If you thoroughly enjoyed this season and felt it delivered the emotional closure you needed, that is completely valid. There is a lot to love here, from the performances to the production values to the nostalgic needle drops. The show gave us indelible characters who will be remembered long after the streaming service shut down. But if you walked away feeling disappointed that 10 years of build-up led to a finale that felt safe rather than bold, that is also a legitimate response. The reluctance to take real risks with beloved characters ultimately undermined the stakes that earlier seasons had so carefully established. Stranger Things meant something to a generation of viewers. It reminded us why we fell in love with stories in the first place, why we gathered around campfires and screens to hear tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. The show wore its influences proudly, but created something that became an influence itself. Whatever flaws this final season has, nothing can take away what the series accomplished at its best. Thank you for watching this complete review of Stranger Things Season 5. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did the finale deliver the closure you wanted? What would you have changed? What moments hit hardest for you? This community thrives on discussion, and I read every comment you leave. If you enjoyed this analysis and want more deep dives into the stories we love, make sure you are subscribed to Quiet Theories. Your support means everything and allows me to keep creating content like this. Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop exploring the theories that make our favourite stories come alive.